I'm an immigrant, and this video is not scripted. I did not plan for it. I'm simply going to speak from the heart. And in this video, I'm going to expose some of the dark truths about the H-1B visa program. And the reason you should listen to me is because, there goes my alarm. That's the feral cat that lived in my walls for about 3 weeks that I now feed on a regular basis. And in return, he catches mice. But anyway, he's in the house that I got for him, so I got to go feed him. I'll be back. All right, I'm back. Let's see. True story. When I was in elementary school, I used to spell very well. I'm not in elementary school anymore, and my spelling is horrible. So I'll admit to you, I literally had to look up how to spell immigrant. But anyway, on this channel, we keep it 100% real. I'm not a professional YouTuber here, not trying to make money, not trying to run a business. So my perspective is going to be very different from a lot of the other channels out there. Also, I have a lot of industry knowledge. A lot of these YouTubers are getting their information from Twitter. I don't even read Twitter because it's so toxic, right? They're in their little bubbles and they're getting fed information about things they don't really know anything about. And for all they harp about mainstream media, which there's a lot of issues with mainstream media, in mainstream media, they will actually send journalists out and actually speak to the people, get on the ground and figure out what's really happening. They don't do that all the time, but they at least do that. That's a thing. A lot of these YouTubers, they're just getting information from Twitter in their bubbles. It's a lot of limitations. So, for example, a lot of the takes on capitalism that you hear from left-wing media, a little bit childish, right? There are some very bad things in capitalism. So first of all, I totally support capitalism. However, I believe in stringent and sensible regulations for capitalism out of control, capitalism where you're only worried about socialism is bad, but you're never worried about being too capitalistic. I have a big problem with that. In an alternate universe, I would be a radical left person. But in this actual universe, in this country, I am a political dissident. I don't align with the left and I absolutely do not align with the right, although I do align with some of the principles that the right claims, but doesn't necessarily demonstrate. But let's get back to my story. So I am an immigrant. I am a naturalized citizen of the United States of America. My feet are cold, so I need my slides. So let me give you a brief history in terms of my background so you can understand the context that I'm coming from and who you're listening to and why you should even listen to me. How am I an immigrant? How am I a naturalized citizen of the United States of America? I was born in Jamaica. My parents were teachers in Jamaica, and we're talking about late 70s, early 80s. And around that time, they were recruiting a lot of teachers from Jamaica. And this is the first reference to some of the conversation happening right now, which is in Jamaica, our education system is a bit more stringent than it is in this country. We push our students much harder, and we push things like critical thinking more, and we push for a deeper understanding of the topics being taught, math, science, and more than you would find in a typical American school. Now, a lot of the people in this country who like to attack our education system, you never hear them talking about this, right? You never hear them talking about, we need to do better with math. We need to do better with science. The science that we're doing is not at the level that it should be. We're not pushing the students to really understand the science. We're just kind of rushing them through and this, you passed, that kind of a thing, studying for the test and all this kind of things that we're doing. That's not the conversation they're having. So they're not pushing for our kids to be more educated and understand more of the math and science. They're pushing, woke, it's too woke and anti-CRT, right? So clearly they're not concerned about education. They're not concerned about educating our students. But they are using that argument to push for the dismantling of what we do have in this country, rather than trying to lift it up and make it better, right? Looking at what is happening in other countries with their education and how can we raise the level of our education. Now, they would hide behind, the reason for it is because they're spending too much time on CRT stuff, but that's not really the argument that they're making, right? They're just fitting in. It's like once you have a hammer, all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail, right? So it's like, everything's woke. This is woke, that is woke. It's childish, right? But they absolutely are not concerned about education. So that being said, my parents were teachers. There was a shortage of teachers in the Caribbean at that time, and they were recruiting teachers from Jamaica because they know about how good our education system is there and how good the training programs for teachers were there. So you could get good quality teachers from Jamaica. So they picked up my father, and he started actually working in the Bahamas. And then from there, he got recruited to work for one of the U.S. territories. So basically, within the Caribbean, there's certain islands that the United States has territory over. So by him working in a U.S. territory, and then me being the young whippersnapper at that time, I actually started, kindergarten in the Bahamas. And then in U.S. territories, I started first grade. Somewhere around there, I became a citizen of the United States of America. Now, since then, what was my experience? How did I perceive my fellow students here in the United States of America. And where did I go versus where did my fellow classmates go? So first of all, because I went to school in terms of high school and before in the Caribbean, well, not just in the Caribbean, but in some islands that were having some issues with poverty and crime, most of my friends from high school are either dead or in jail. I went through some very difficult times myself. One of the reasons why I'm not good in math, which is ironic because in my profession, math is very important, but I was able to succeed anyway, and we'll get to that. One of the reasons I'm bad in math is because I was goofing around. I think right around junior high school, I started goofing around, hanging out with a bad crowd. Some of those guys that are dead or in jail. I mean, these guys were drug dealers. I wasn't dealing drugs. Good for me. I had good parents and they taught me good values, but I was still a child. I was still becoming independent and becoming myself. So I chose to go on a different path. But I think that solid foundation that I had from loving parents who taught me the right way, who taught me integrity and honesty and doing the right thing, that kind of kept me grounded. So even while I was surrounded by some very bad people, I mean, at some point in time, bumped into a kid who was from Jamaica, and being a kid who was born in Jamaica, but now living on an island, another island, it was a little bit awkward, right? Because I wasn't around fellow Jamaicans, right? So there was a little bit of a culture disconnect. So I found someone from Jamaica. I'm like, this is cool. So I started hanging out with him. And it turns out that he lived in a neighborhood where most of the Jamaicans on the island lived. And it was one of the worst areas. I mean, we had areas where the police were afraid to go to, right? In a place that's how things were. This was one of the really bad neighborhoods. So came in handy in terms of, when everybody want to mess with me, I had my crew. But these are very bad guys. And I started skipping class. I remember, I'm supposed to be in class. I'm hanging out in the hallways with these, we would call roughnecks. And, they're doing what we call chanting. So that's a reggae thing. That's not my thing. But that's the thing we would do. We'd be in the hallway chanting. I guess in the United States, you guys would be rapping. But and we had a principal. Man, this guy, it's almost kind of like this is not real life. Well, life imitates art, imitates life. Because I remember those movies. Remember the movie with the guy, the principal with the bat or something like that? I mean, we had a principal that was kind of like that because this was a really bad school. And he used to run us down. And I still remember to this day, one of the time we were hanging out and he saw us because it's supposed to be in class. And he starts Usain Bolt chasing us down. Man, I'm going to jump off of that because I don't want to get sidetracked. But I do remember, just to illustrate, because I want to give you guys context where I'm coming from. But I remember a day where, so what you call gangs here, we would call posses, and it was based on your neighborhood. And there was a lot of, just like how you have gangs that might be affiliated with other gangs, we kind of had affiliated neighborhoods. So, one neighborhood was friendly with another neighborhood, and then you had neighborhoods that you guys were enemies of. So we had something spiral out of control where, let's just say, I don't remember the exact detail, but let's say you have a few different neighborhoods. So you have 6 different neighborhoods, right? And let's say that these neighborhoods are friendly with each other, and these neighborhoods are friendly with each other. And both of these groups are in opposition to each other. Or in today's terms, you would say ops, right? So this is kind of what happened. Maybe some guy from this neighborhood messed with someone from this neighborhood. So they had a fight or something, right? So other people from this neighborhood came out in defense of the one guy who was in the initial incident, right? So a bunch of other people come out, and they go and gang up on this person, right? So then a bunch of people from this neighborhood come out to back up, their guy, right? So now you have this kind of a brawl type thing going on. And then things are escalating out of control. So people from this neighborhood jump in because it's a friendly neighborhood. So they jump in on the action. So then another friendly neighborhood from the original neighborhood, so they jump in, right? So before you know it, you have all these neighborhoods, everyone's sending out troops, as it were. And back then we weren't really big on guns. The guns were around, but it was more rocks and bottles and stuff like that. But before you know it, you've got an all-out brawl. One day things got so bad that they actually shut the school down. People were just gathering weapons, right? I remember kids running around and they were grabbing rocks and grabbing sticks and everything, locking people in the gyms. Teachers got beat down. I remember 2 kids beating up police officers in front of the school. So things were a little bit crazy. Somewhere in high school, partially motivated by conflicts that I had with my father, I'm trying to do my own thing, and he was a real old school. He was not political at all, but he represents what a lot of online conservatives sort of pretend to be. Like, he was an old school. When you talk about family values, he really was about that life, right? He really was about that life. Tough love. And I was kind of rebelling against that, and I wanted my own independence. And I came to a conclusion of like, listen, man, you can't stay in your father's house forever. And, I didn't really want to abide by all of his rules, big rules guy. So I need a career. I need to be able to get a job so I can actually, do my own thing. So I started, taking school more seriously. And I made it to Algebra 2. Ironically, I failed history. I had to take history in summer school, I remember. But regardless, I did graduate from high school. did not go to my own graduation, right? So whereas a lot of people online, they try to be, contrarian for content, and I want to be, the Democrats like something, I'm going to be opposed to that, or if the liberals like something, I'm going to be opposed, you know what I mean? I am 100% legit. I've always been hardcore independent, even from that very young age. And it was, for example, the kid that was goofing around and not paying attention in class in high school, I was actually taking for fun a college level, physics class, because I really loved physics. I was really into physics. So I was actually, my chemistry teacher also taught a class in the local university, and she allowed me to sit in on the class. So there I was, this high schooler hanging out in a college, sitting in for free, basically, on a college level physics. Like that's a nerd 1000, right? Officially. But one thing that I recognized from my high school was a lot of the other kids, and it seems ironic considering my background when I was younger, but when I got to high school, I got really serious. I started, for example, I started participating in science fair projects. And one year, my science project was the internet. That's how old I am. I was on the internet before the internet was a thing, right? I won 3 years in a row science fair projects. And one of those was the internet. And we're talking about 1990, 1994. So most people didn't even have computers back then, right? But yeah, so I was working really hard, pushing really hard. I was always reading all these science magazines and really nerding out. One of my big things was, if you saw one of my videos recently with my car stereo, I was really into car stereos. I mean, we got into studying acoustics and how sound vibrates and different frequencies and human hearing and building speaker boxes. And I was really into that stuff. Then I took electronics class, I took woodwork class. So picked up a lot of skills from that. And one thing I recognize, a lot of the kids, and this is in the Caribbean, but this is U.S. territory, a lot of the kids to me seem to be not very motivated, just kind of like, when I graduate, I'm just going to work for my dad or stuff like that. I was looked at as, I'm a nerd, blah, and it was more, kids were more focused on, being in the cool group and fitting in and outfits and all that kind of stuff. And not that I didn't care about that stuff, but I was also sort of maturing and focusing on my education and thinking about my future. And, I was looking at the stars, and classmates were just they just were not pushing themselves to that level. It was just kind of like floating around. Obviously, that's not everyone. I was not the only one that was taking things seriously. There were students who were taking things seriously, but the general culture seemed to just be a very, lackadaisical. While a fire got lit up somewhere around 16 years old. Unfortunately, my mother died just before that, so I don't know how that fits into it, but I was lit up on fire. Let's go. I wanted to be an engineer back then. And this is the first sort of impression that I got of American culture, right? Very disingenuous people out there talking about culture and Americans are lazy and whatever. But if we put that aside, that these people are disingenuous, trying to distract, and they're not about anything, we have to also recognize that there actually are some problems. A lot of these people who try to distract and play all the little political games, they don't just totally lie. They start with the truth, and they use that truth to sort of lead you astray. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm giving you the raw truth, the uncomfortable truth, right? With a true agenda of helping people, right? As opposed to just dividing and all this kind of nonsense. So I recognized that right away. And once I graduated from high school, I ended up going into the military. So I'm former Air Force, and that was an experience that I value even to this day. Some of the most difficult times in my life, I have fallen back on my military training, my no excuses ideology, where I remember the drill sergeant used to say, being dead is not an excuse. And that kind of stuff really sat with me and resonated with me. So it's kind of like, get it done. Don't let anybody tell you can't get it done, right? So that military stuff is part of who I am, but my culture is also part of it, right? The Jamaican culture. I know a lot of you, maybe you just know about music and, probably a lot of the negative stuff about Jamaica, but if you actually go to the core of Jamaican culture and you look at how we educate our students and how we do in schools, there is a sense of pride and a sense of, striving for excellence type of thing that is part of the Jamaican culture. People express it in different ways, of course, but that is part of Jamaican culture. So I think being born in a third world country, growing up with not a lot of money, fortunately my father's hard work did pay off to a point where, somewhere around high school level, we were doing much better than we were before. But if you go way back, we were living not too far from the projects, next to a lagoon, and the smell, you don't want to live next to a lagoon. People were breaking into our house, stealing our TV. That was kind of the norm. We had cows that used to come and knock on our fence. So yeah, it was not glamorous at all. Hand-me-down clothes. And then in Jamaica, it was even worse. That's why we left Jamaica. I mean, we had multiple family members with house invasions. So where someone comes into your house while you're in there and robs you, that's what was going on. They were burning down police stations. I mean, it was a little bit crazy. But the point is, growing up where there weren't a lot of opportunities, and then coming to the United States, because I was in U.S. territory, then as a young adult, I came to the United States itself domestically. So I started working at a very low level The interview that I did was kind of a joke to me because as a kid, all that nerding out paid off, right? And also poverty paid off because, my mother made a big sacrifice to buy me a computer when I was maybe 16 years old. She really believed in me and she saw a lot of potential in me. And so she invested in me by getting me my first computer. Um, it was a Tandy RLX 1000, a 286 computer that was kind of one of the lowest level that you could get at that time. I think it was a lower level, so it wasn't the bottom, but it was pretty low level. I think it costed back then. I don't know. Adjusting for inflation, I don't know what that would have costed, but the number I remember was like $999 for a desktop computer that was so low. Little, it was a 14-inch screen. I think it was four color, no VGA color, so not this thousands of colors we see now, and a 40 megabyte hard drive. I think it had 1 megabyte of RAM. I mean, yeah. Anyway, because this computer was so slow and I wanted to play games that the computer really was not capable of doing, they basically did the equivalent of those guys who work on cars and, they rebuild engines and, they figure out little tricks to make them a lot of money. So you master everything you can, to tweak. Like some guys maybe just rip out the seat so they're saving on weight, right? That's a cheap thing to do, right? Just make it lighter. So I did the equivalent with computers, and I was able to do things I wasn't supposed to be able to do. I was running Windows on that 286. Windows, I think the minimum requirement back then was a 386, the higher level computer, but I made it run on mine. It barely ran, but the fact that it ran at all was a testament to my knowledge of computers. And when I went on that interview in New York City, way back, late 90s. The interview was a joke to me, man. It was a joke. The questions they were asking me, I mean, it was equivalent of if you're like a big video game person, you're a Call of Duty person, and your interview is, naming all the levels or naming all the bad guys or something. It's kind of like, really? I do this for fun. So needless to say, and how did I get that job interview? Some kid from some island with no connections here, don't even know my worth or my value, don't know nothing about nothing, right? I know a little something about something, but you know what I mean. I saw this really fancy building in Manhattan, tall building, looked like the kind of building that a big company, some amazing company that they would be in. I walked in there with my resume, I had an interview 2 weeks later, got the job. They offered me, I think, $10,000 more than I asked for. I was so ignorant. So I was young, right? Didn't even know my worth. The pay I was asking for was so low that they had to raise it up. Think about that. You go in and you say, I want $20,000. You're like, oh, well, I think I got $28,000. If I'm to guess, I think they paid me $28,000 for that job. I don't know what the inflation adjusted. I didn't do the inflation adjusted on that one. But by the time I was 22, I was making, I would say, inflation adjusted, maybe $70,000 a year. By the time I was 30, I was making inflation adjusted $170,000. So back then it was $110,000 a year. But in today's money, that would have been $170,000 at about 30. How did that happen? So throughout my career, I maintained that level of fight. I always look back on poverty as something I didn't want to experience in my life, right? I remember growing up, parents worried about, the electric bill and close the fridge and and all these little things that they were worried about because, they didn't have that much money. And I didn't want to have that concern. That was a big guiding thing for me. I did not want to have to be financially constrained. And that motivated me to work really hard. That wasn't the only thing. I was also ambitious. That was part of it as well. But part of what was fueling the ambition was also that, right? So 16-hour days, that was the norm for me. And what I would find is at the end of the day, a lot of my coworkers, they want to go to the bar and hang out. And I'm the doofus that would want to stay behind and grind even harder. Now, keep in mind, I was a naturalized citizen, so this is not like some H-1B visa type situation. I mean, I'm totally a citizen, so there's no reason for me to work that hard, right? I already, quote unquote, made it. I'm in the country, I'm a citizen. So that was all me, right? But that was typical for me. On most days, I would take my work home with me. Back then, I was living in a basement apartment in Brooklyn, filled with bugs. No furniture. The only furniture I had was that bed was my workstation. I would come home and I would sit on that bed with my laptop on my lap on the bed and, learning, looking stuff up online, whatever it is, and reading books, trying to pick up new skills, trying to enhance my skills. So that's why I always say education is important. The source of the education, that's optional. You can go the college route, which I did not, or you can buy those same books that the college is using and you can read them yourself, but that's not for everyone. I grinded so hard and I was rewarded, right? 170 something $1,000 by 30. And now, just to give a little perspective, now in 25, if talking in today's money, of course, if someone, obviously, if I was making 176,000 in today's money when I was 30, then obviously someone offering me 150, 160, 170, 180 is not really that exciting. Anything less than 150 is really low pay, just relative to where I'm at with my career. But the path that took me there was a path that began, with parents that were a product of an education system that was very vigorous and pushed for excellence. And we don't have that here in this country. However, that potential argument is used to support some very disgusting things, very anti-American things. And that is this H-1B visa thing. So in my career, I noticed right away that there were a lot of people who were from countries like India. I would be a minority at my jobs because 95% of my colleagues were from countries like India, right? As a person who worked so hard, had built up an excellent resume, worked for all these top companies. I was associate director by 30, right? And even with all those accomplishments, there were multiple times in my career where I was out of work for quite a while. I think one time I kind of floated around for a year or two. Now, it's not to say that that doesn't happen. Right? Just because you have a high level skills or you got a great resume, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed a job or whatever. But when I'm looking at the amount of people in my industry that, are from India, it makes me wonder, those periods of time when I was out of work, right? Even though, I am an immigrant, but I was a U.S. citizen at that point, right? Doesn't matter the fact that I wasn't born in the country. I was a citizen. And as a citizen, for me to be sitting on the sidelines with all this talent, and you talk about, like Elon Musk want to talk about, we don't have enough good people and blah. There I am. I was a gold mine to pretty much any employer, right? Guy who works so hard, so dedicated, so much skill, great experience, always trying to go above and beyond, right? Why would that guy be out of work for a period of, great periods of time, multiple times in my life, such that even after working six figures, I would watch all my accounts drain out and then up at a point where I'm wondering how I'm going to pay the rent multiple times in my life. I even thought about like food stamps. I never went that far, but that was something I thought about. Homelessness was something I thought about. Ironically, that is something that I actually ended up experiencing after all that and got to such a high level within the last few years. Ironically, after purchasing a home, I ended up being the homeless landlord, which is something that my subscribers know about. That's a story for another day. But things got very difficult. And just as a numbers game, if so many people in my industry are from other countries on these visas, what are the odds that, if not for so many of them being here, that I wouldn't have been out of work for so long, right? But then here's the dark side. One of those companies I worked for was owned by someone from India. And this guy used to totally abuse his own people. He would bring people from India, treat them like garbage, pay them garbage wages. One time he literally threw his phone at one of my colleagues, right? Verbal abuse. And then when they got to the point where they were actually able to finally leave, he would track them down and badmouth them to their bosses. An evil guy, right? This is what's happening in this country, right? People like Elon Musk love to bring in these foreign workers so he can own them, pay them whatever, treat them however, and get them to work so hard. And then he wants to brag about how hard working these people are. And then it's kind of like, well, a slave does work kind of hard, right? Because they don't want to get beat or killed or whatever, right? Obviously, that's not what's happening here, but it's the same kind of dynamic. You're in this country because of this company. What would you do to keep that job? Maybe you're leaving, extreme poverty, whatever it is, right? You really want to become a citizen. And this company is allowing you to be able to do that. What would you not do to stay in the country? So you're able to get a lot out of these people, certainly much more than you would the other workers. And then you could use that to demonize American workers and say, man, look at how hardworking these guys are. Interesting. So it's a shame that you can't treat American workers like garbage and have a chain around their neck where they don't have the choice to just leave and go somewhere else. Maybe if we could treat American workers like slaves, then we wouldn't need the foreign workers, right? Because I bet you these American workers would be working much harder if they didn't have the option of just leaving if they didn't like the conditions. So when you have an American worker, you got to cater to them. You got to keep them, right? You got to make sure you got to pay them good money so they stay. You got to give them good benefits so they can stay, right? Or you could bring in H-1B people, pay them half the price, and then you don't have to treat them anyway. Treat them however you want to. You're having a bad day, just yell at them, chew them out, throw things at them. That's what Elon Musk wants, right? Fuck the American workers, right? So although there is some truth to the critiques about American culture and definitely our education system, the people who are critiquing it have no interest in making it better, right? You don't see Republicans or right-wing influencers talking about, our math. We don't push hard enough. We need to go to higher levels of math, or, we need more math tutors, or the science classes, the stuff that they're passing people who don't really understand the material. They're not talking about the quality of education. They're just distracting with culture war bullshit, right? Because they don't care about the education system. They don't care about getting people educated, because the more educated people are, the less they're going to vote for Republicans. Anyway, the bottom line is the H-1B visa program is a program that is very important and valuable. It serves a purpose, and the purpose is really to recruit exceptional talent, not just to bring people into the country. And if we want to dominate as a country, we want to be able to hire the best people. Our companies need to be able to hire the best people. However, that's not what's happening in many cases. What's happening is American workers are being screwed over to maximize profits by creating essentially a version of modern slavery. That's what the H-1B visa program is used for, right? Again, it's also used for some very good things, bringing in some really great people, keeping us strong as a nation. But we can't appreciate that without also recognizing the abuses. So yes, our schools should be better. Education in this country is flawed, but I don't really see anyone having a conversation about improving the problem. The only people talking about education are the ones who would like us to be less educated. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.